Good morning. How are you all doing? You're from everywhere. Austin, Texas. And hi, Evie from Florida. Um, Heather from Baltimore, Maryland. MN from Houston, Texas. How are you all doing today? So the first thing I want to know is, are you starting to understand and appreciate your ADHD brains a bit more? Would you let me know? How's it going so far? Hi, Stephanie from Arkansas. You're always so helpful, and I so appreciate it. So let me know, are you starting to appreciate your brains? Are you starting to understand them? Are you starting to, dare I say, maybe a little bit starting to fall in love with them? Yes. Yes. Alex says the info about hormonal changes blew her mind. And I'm so happy to see that many of you are saying, yes, it is making a difference. So we are going to work on that even more today. So first of all, I suspect that maybe a few of you missed training number 1. And if you did, you can go to tracyotsuka.com/master series hub. And I developed that because of our ADHD brains, right? There is one place that you can go where everything is going to be there, except for the Facebook group. The Facebook Lives are going to be in there, though. So it's one place. So if you missed Master Series Training 1, go to tracyotsuka.com/master series hub. Is there someone here that can put that into chat, please? Okay, so today after our training, if you would get your questions together and send them over for the Facebook Live that's going to be tomorrow, the Q&A. It's going to be at 1 p.m. PST. I'm going to set a time for this one because I know kind of how you all are working. And I have to say, I am so incredibly impressed with how brief your questions were. They were brilliant. They were good questions too. But I think when we take the time to pause, right, rather than processing as we talk, we end up with really good questions. So I really appreciate them. I am also, so today we're going to go fast. And I know some of you were telling me that you really struggle because you can't write things down fast enough. And I know that I talk really fast. So I am going to be creating a transcript. And I believe, again, the transcript for training number 1 should be on the Master Series Hub by now. If not, I think Wendy's got it going. But if it's not there, it will be there probably by, I would say, by midday today, unless, barring some problems. So I want you to go to the Facebook Live Q&A. I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. I forgot to finish my thought. Yeah, it's spyhappy.me/QA2. And if you could post your questions there, and then I will answer them tomorrow in our pop-up Facebook group at 1 o'clock. Okay, what else did I want to tell you? Okay, so as I was starting to say, I am going to cover a lot today. And, as far as building your own toolkit for your ADHD brain. And I don't want you to stress out about this. Remember, one of the most important things that I can impart with, on you when you leave is that for us, positive emotion is everything. If we are not in positive emotion, we can't get anything done. We can't learn. We can't, even know, okay, what would be the next step? So I need you to be in positive emotion. So I'm going to go through a bunch of things that can help our ADHD brains that you can use for your toolkit. And what I want you to do is keep it light and airy. Okay. There will be a transcript, number 1, if you want to go through it again. But for now, I just want you to hear and get some ideas of some of the things that you can do. Write them down if they strike your fancy, if they bring you positive emotion. Okay. And then we're going to have some time over the rest of today. And actually, I'm giving you through the weekend, I think, to create your, oh my God, I forgot what it's called. To create your, I have such a problem with titles of things. To create your own ADHD user's manual. So you will have time, but if you follow along in the workbook, does everybody have the workbook now? And if someone doesn't, could you please pop the workbook in the chat? I sent it. The first email I sent this morning, the workbook for training number 2 was in there. It's also in the Facebook group. I don't want to spend the time now searching for it. I want to get going, but I think the workbook will help you to see where I'm going, because again, for us, it's always sort of getting the lay of the land. And once we get the lay of the land and we know where someone is going, then we can our brain calms down a bit and we can just sort of relax into it. And of course, we can learn better. Okay. So, yay. Everybody has the workbook today. I'm so proud of you. Okay. So I'm going to go into the slides and let's get going. If you missed the training, you may not know who I am. So I'm going to go into a very short little few slides at the beginning just to introduce myself. Okay. Here we go. So, who am I to be leading this master series? My name is Tracy Otsuka, and I am the Make Limoncello Out of Lemons woman. Yeah, you probably noticed that most of my images are of Positano, which is one of my favorite places in the world. Being an eternal optimist is often an ADHD trait. Well, I am the eternal optimist. I believe that whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're absolutely right. In an article I wrote for Attitude Magazine, I crowned myself the peddler of hope for ADHD women. I pride myself on seeing the gifts in ADHD women before they can even see them themselves. I'm proud to have been called the fairy godmother for ADHD women by none other than Dr. Edward Hallowell, the leading authority on ADHD and the co-author of both Driven to Distraction and now ADHD 2.0. I'm the host of the #1 podcast for ADHD women called ADHD for Smartass Women, and the founder of the Facebook group of the same name. I am also the creator of Your ADHD Brain is A-OK. This is a step-by-step program which I built using my patented cartography system to help ADHD women live to their full potential by discovering their values, strengths, superpowers, passions, and purpose. Basically, what they're doing is they are building that foundation of who they are with me. I've also built the A-OK Everyday Planner for the nonlinear brain. If you follow my podcast, you also know that I'm a lawyer, not a doctor, a lifelong student, and an ADCA certified ADHD coach. So I was diagnosed with ADHD 8 months after my 12-year-old son, Marcus, was diagnosed. He's 16 in this photo, and he's now a freshman at NYU, and he's doing so well. If it weren't for Marcus, I doubt if I would have ever been diagnosed. So on Monday, we went through training #1, Understanding ADHD in Women, where we talked about #1, what does ADHD look like generally? #2, what does ADHD look like in women specifically? We looked at hormones. We looked at why women struggle more with ADHD than men. And we talked about ADHD and emotions. If you've subscribed to this master series and you missed training #1, again, check out the hub or your emails for the replay. So now that you know that it's ADHD, just learning the name, what it is, that you're not imagining things and you aren't broken and you just have a different brain, this alone greatly reduces the shame. So what's next? Get diagnosed. Dr. Edward Hallowell talks about how this is the good news diagnoses. Once we know what it is, everything gets better. Then once you're diagnosed, or while you're waiting to get diagnosed, you have to learn how your specific ADHD brain works. Just because you and I both have ADHD won't mean that what works for me will work for you. You have to become the best expert on you, the only expert on you. Then you have to test what you learn about your ADHD brain and try new things in order to build your own ADHD user's manual. So how do you create your own ADHD user's manual? Well, I'm going to help you. And this is the deal. You're not just going to walk away today and have it all perfect and put together. As I mentioned, I can give you the framework, some suggestions, but then you're going to have to test it yourself to see what works for you. Your ADHD user's manual, it's going to have 6 prongs. And I'm going to go through each one of these sections in more detail. But first, let's just get an overview. So number 1 is education. We've already established that you're the only expert there is, right? So you need to educate yourself so that you can advocate for yourself. Number 2, we're going to talk about support and connection. Connection is so important for our ADHD brains. So we're going to talk about what kind of support and what kind of connection we need. Number 3, I call it dopamine enhancers. What are the things that we can do to reduce our ADHD symptoms and spike our dopamine? Number 4, positive emotion. You already know how important positive emotion is. So where can we find more of it? Number 5, perspective. How do we change our point of view so we can go from focusing on our weaknesses to understanding and then working in our strengths? And number 5, our workarounds. What are the little things we can do to make life easier and better accommodate how our brains work? Now, I want to let you know that I only barely touched on this subject of ADHD and what could be part of your ADHD user's manual. I should say I'm going to barely touch on that just because there is so much. But we have to start somewhere. So this is what I'm going to offer you. But over time, you're going to notice as you do the research and as you figure out how your ADHD brain works, you're going to figure out additional things that you can add to your ADHD user's manual. So let's start with prong number 1, which is education. This includes learning everything you can about ADHD generally, but then specifically your ADHD and how it shows up for you. You're the expert on you, so you need to educate yourself on what ADHD looks like for you. You need to learn how to advocate for yourself because there are way too many instances where you're going to be up against a supposed medical professional and others who know nothing about ADHD. And I don't care if you're talking about a mental health professional, a coach, a spouse, a parent, a friend, anyone. They may know what's best for them. They do not know what's best for you. Do not abdicate your mental health to anyone else. And let me tell you, this can be difficult. I've had doctors on my podcast who've had other doctors shame them by saying things like, "You outgrow ADHD. You should know that as a doctor." Now, this particular woman, she was a young doctor, so she just assumed he must know more than she did. And so my thought is if this can happen to a doctor, it can happen to any of us. My first bit of advice is to read everything you can about ADHD. The key, however, is to follow experts who have ADHD. We talked about this on Monday. Experts like Dr. Edward Hallowell, Dr. John Rady, Dr. Kathleen Nadeau, Dr. Ellen Littman, Dr. Patricia Quinn. And those 3 doctors, the 3 women doctors, really specialize in ADHD and women. And of course, Dr. Roberto Olivardia. I've created an ADHD book list. Almost all of the authors on this list are diagnosed ADHD. And you can find that book list at tracyotsuka.com/book list. I also want to mention that last night we put together a resource list that is much more extensive. Actually, if you downloaded the workbook this morning, that resource list is in there with all the links that I'm going to be talking about. But if you didn't, I will send it again this afternoon so that you have a copy of the new resource list. It's much more comprehensive. So this is what the book list looks like on my website. There are also many reputable online and print resources to learn about ADHD. My favorite is Attitude Magazine. I write for them, but they're really, well, I shouldn't say but, right? They're really reputable. They have a medical review panel that's really impressive, and it includes Attitude Magazine includes a physical magazine, but it also includes an online website. And they have a section for parents, a section for school and learning. They have a section for adults. There's a resources tab. There's a symptoms test if you want to go in and test your symptoms to see, is it ADHD? There's a section for medications. There's a section just for professionals with research updates. In our big Facebook group, we have a rule that you're not allowed to post anything that's pseudoscience. But I'll often get members who report posts as pseudoscience. And my bright line test is Attitude Magazine. If Attitude Magazine is talking about it, then it's not pseudoscience, and we allow it in our Facebook group. An example of this is essential oils, which I'm a proponent of. I believe they do make a difference, and there's science behind why. And Attitude Magazine has talked about essential oils and ADHD as far as for some symptom management. So Attitude Mag is ADDITUDE mag.com. CHADD is another reputable resource. It stands for Children and Adults with ADD. They also have a bi-monthly magazine called Attention Magazine, which is in print, and it's also in digital. Their website is CHADD, CHADD.org. And I think when I edit these slides, I'm going to make sure that the URLs are here. We always learn something new every time we do something, don't we? ADDA stands for Attention Deficit Disorder Association, and it's yet another organization, but this one was founded especially to help adults with ADHD lead better lives, and you can find them at ADD.org. All of these resources that I just mentioned, they offer free webinars with great ADHD experts, resources, and opportunities to connect and learn. Yeah, I'm seeing what you all are writing here. I think I'm seeing what you all are writing here. And the workbook is in the first email that went out this morning, and it is down at the bottom in the PS. So yesterday, I shared this with one of my wonderful AOK students, Grace Parker, who was asking about twice exceptional ADHD women. And I recommended this site to her, or this training to her, actually. So when I first started researching and learning about ADHD, the ADHD Women's Palooza is the first thing that I signed up for. It's run by Linda Rogley, who's been around forever. She wrote the book Confessions of an AD Diva. What she does twice a year, once for women, and then she has a kids palooza in the summer, is she interviews a slew of ADHD experts on various topics, and then you can listen for 24 hours for free. After that, if you can't make it within the first 24 hours, you can buy the interviews. I think with the transcripts, it's like $97. This year, it's starting, as you can see, it's going to be next Monday through Friday. I can't do math. I'm like Barbie. This year, Edward Hallowell is going to be presenting. William Dodson is going to be talking about RSD. So I think for a lot of you, you could learn a lot from him. Carolyn McGuire is going to talk about social issues. And I think it's social issues. Yeah, it's social issues specific to women. She's going to talk about social blind spots. Roberto Olivardia is going to be presenting on cannabis and CBD. Carolyn Parcells, she's amazing. I've heard her speak a couple times. She's going to be talking about ADHD women and medication. She knows so much about medication. And I've got to tell you, I've never heard anyone present the options so clearly. So I would highly recommend her talk. And then there will be, and I can't remember her name right now. Oh my gosh. And she's so good. That's who I was talking to Grace about yesterday. She is going to be presenting on twice exceptional ADHD women, which again, I've heard her talk about it, and it's fascinating actually. So anyway, it's going to be starting on Monday, March 8th. So it's perfect timing, and I highly recommend it. I'm going to be presenting as well. And I'm just so flattered that I was asked. So it's ADHDpalooza.com. So obviously we can read, but a lot of us struggle with reading. Sometimes we do better when we're listening, right? While we're listening, we can do other things, like we can work out, we can garden, we can walk, we can clean the house, we can drive, right? We can listen while we go to work. I know a lot of people tell me that's when they listen to my podcast. So most of the books on my book list, just so you know, they're available on Audible. so you can actually hear them and have an audiobook instead of a physical book. There are also many great podcasts that are also about ADHD that I'd like to highlight. Of course, there's my podcast, right? ADHD for Smartass Women. There are many others, though. Dr. Hallowell has a great podcast, and his episodes are so short. And there's something about the way this man presents this subject that it just seems so understandable, versus sometimes I hear other ADHD experts speak on ADHD and I just get more confused than had I not listened to them. So anyway, his podcast is called Distraction. Attitude Magazine also has a podcast. It's called ADHD Experts. So Attitude Magazine, they produce very informative webinars and they're free. And they always feature ADHD experts. And so what they do, if you don't want to sit and watch the webinar, they create a podcast out of the webinar and they post it. They post the episodes, obviously, in their podcast. Now, I'm a little bit of an audio snob and the sound is not great, but the guests are. Chad, by the way, also has a podcast. I also like Peter Shankman's podcast, Faster Than Normal. It was one of the first podcasts that I started listening to when I was diagnosed with ADHD. And the reason that I liked it is he does a lot of interviews with men and women that have ADHD, and he's very strength focused. Diane Wingert is a personal friend. She's amazing. And she has a podcast called The Driven Woman. Her podcast caters to the ADHD businesswoman. So if you're an entrepreneur or you're struggling with more of the business challenges of ADHD, this is a great podcast for you. There's also a great podcast that isn't widely known that I think is fantastic. And it's called Full Prefrontal, and it's all about executive functions. So it's not specifically about ADHD like each episode, but it's very informative and very relevant because what is ADHD, right? We struggle with our executive functions. So learning all about ADHD is step one. But then we need to, you know this already, right? We need to learn specifically about our ADHD brain. Everyone needs to know who they are and what they're meant to do with their life. But for those of us with ADHD, it's imperative. Why? Because ADHD brains are brains of interest. If we're not interested, it's going to be difficult to be successful. If we are interested, we can absolutely be successful. So it's our charge to figure out what's important to us. What is it that we value? What are our strengths, talents, skills, superpowers, passions, and purpose? And I'm going to get more into this on Friday, but that's what my step-by-step system, Your ADHD Brain is A-OK, is all about. Really figuring out who you are. And if you don't already know, right? Instead of asking, how do I fit in? You're asking, where do I stand out? For example, who am I? What's important to me? And what do I love to do? And only after knowing the answers to those questions are you then deciding what you're going to do in the world. So let's get to our second prong. Our second prong is all about support. I agree with you, Kara. Sometimes listening to experts talk about ADHD, especially when they don't have ADHD, is so difficult versus, and that's kind of why I made the decision with my podcast that I really want to focus more on having other women with ADHD who've been successful with their ADHD, or maybe just successful in a certain area, right? But they're still struggling in another area because it just makes it so much more attainable, right? And it brings it home and we can look at them and say, oh my gosh, I get that. That's me. So I completely agree with you. Okay, so support. Support means doctors, therapists, especially if you have trauma in your background, coaches, teachers, tutors, anyone that can help you navigate your ADHD. So I often get asked how to find a professional, whether we're talking about a doctor for a diagnosis, a coach, a tutor, a therapist. The first thing I would recommend is start by checking around. I'm a little slow here with the fingers. Start by checking around with those you know who have personal experience with ADHD. Ask them if they have an ADHD professional that they would highly recommend. Attitude, Chad, and Ada, those sites that I just mentioned and organizations, they all have professional resource directories. Rachel Gurmarath, God, I hope I'm not massacring her name. She's in our big Facebook group, and she just put together a professional ADHD directory. She's building it using Google Forms and Sheets, and it should be available very soon. I'm not sure if she's posted it yet, but if you're interested in it, just tag her in the Facebook group, and she'll tell you what's going on there. Her name is Rachel Gurmarath, Germeroth. And what it'll be is a list of professionals who our members have had success with. Another good way to find a knowledgeable ADHD professional, if you don't have a referral, is call your nearest medical school. Ask for the Department of Psychiatry. And once you get them, ask them, do you have anyone on staff, in your clinics? Anyone that you can refer that, for example, if you're looking for an adult that treats adult ADHD, and if you're looking for a child or that treats children with ADHD, usually they are a great resource because what you're going to get is someone who really understands ADHD. You can also call your state medical society and or your state psychiatry society and ask that same questions. One of the questions, though, that you want to ask of any professional is, how many children with ADHD have you treated? How many women with ADHD have you treated? This right there, it tells you an awful lot. I mean, I would want numbers in the hundreds, like 500 plus, to really feel comfortable that they understand ADHD. And, it's easier to find a medical professional that really understands ADHD with children. It is a lot harder to find a medical professional that understands ADHD with women. Okay, so let's talk about a therapist versus a coach. So therapists deal with the past and understanding and answering the why questions. Why did my father abandon our family, right? Questions like that, big, heavy questions that you've wondered about your entire life and are really causing you to struggle. Coaches deal with moving forward. So coaching is about the who, what, and how questions. Who do you want to be? What do you think has worked in the past? How can you break down that goal into the smallest possible tasks? And I think it was Edward Hallowell who said in our group a few weeks ago that you can't therapy your way out of rejection-sensitive dysphoria or even rumination. Think about it. If you're talking with anyone over and over about all the reasons you suck, you can't do anything, you're a loser, you can't do anything right, you're going to fail. What you're doing is digging those grooves in your brain deeper and deeper. And over time, you start believing your own BS. Now, if you have untreated trauma, you absolutely need to deal with the trauma first. And that is through hiring a therapist. This is frankly where therapy is so important. Now, if you have a therapist that is really qualified, and it would be great to find, and I'm going to tell you this is difficult because I've been looking, but it is very hard to find a therapist who is also really well-versed and an expert in ADHD. Now, if you can find a therapist who specializes in trauma and specializes in ADHD and knows how to move people forward and, coaches as well, oh my gosh, that is the best case scenario. Now, if you have untreated trauma, you absolutely need to deal with the trauma first. And this is where therapy is so important. If you don't work through the trauma first, any work you do on the ADHD will not, it's just likely not going to be as successful. So again, ask the therapist if they've worked with ADHD clients. So let's talk about coaching now. If you have ADHD and you want to hire a coach, you need an ADHD coach. So many times I talk to women who've worked with a coach that's not trained in ADHD, and they talk about how useless and frustrating it was. I'm one of those women, and based on a coaching experience with one coach, I just thought coaching was a complete boondoggle, waste of money, waste of time. And honestly, for years, I would say that I was uncoachable. What I was uncoachable if I was using an ADHD coach. General life coaching didn't work for me because it wasn't ADHD coaching. It was like, I don't know, regular brain coaching. And that doesn't work for the ADHD brain. But ADHD coaching truly does. So let me tell you why that is. You can't tell someone with ADHD what to do, right? Because it doesn't work. We already know these things don't work. So we don't listen. Or if we do and we try it, we try what they're suggesting, there's a good chance it won't work. And then we're even more frustrated and likely to blame ourselves. I'm lazy, I'm unmotivated, I'm stupid. No, you're none of those things. It's like planners and calendars and to-do lists. Just because they work for you, regular brain people, doesn't mean they work for us, creative, nonlinear brain people. We don't know if it'll work. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. The deal is we have to try and see what works for us. And that's why, we can get really defiant and people might say, ugh, she never listens. That's her problem. Well, she doesn't listen because she knows you're wrong. So what else? Well, in regular coaching, the coach might say, okay, what are you going to do today? And the client says, I'm going to get my social media plan done or my homework done by Friday. And they write it down and they go and do it. For us, that is rarely enough. Certainly not if we don't want to do it, right? So the emails that you all are getting that I had to write and send out so that you showed up here, right? All of the administrative details to make sure that all the links work, that this platform works. This was literally physically painful for me to accomplish. Even though I had all kinds of help, it was still hard. It took me weeks to even hire my tech VA because the thought of having to sit still and explain to her what happens first, second, and third. First of all, I wasn't even sure, right? I wasn't even sure that I could remember all that. It was literally physically painful. It's too big, right? Where do we even start? The ADHD coaching model requires that the coach goes deeper. So what do I mean by that? Well, you need to really break it down. And then we need all the prompts so we don't forget. And then we need backup prompts in case we forget the first prompts, right? The other area where ADHD coaching is different than life coaching, and this was so important for me, is that ADHD coaching, it can't charge neutral. Life coaches, they're trained to be very unemotional, restrained, passionless, if you will. And that's never going to work for us. We need emotion to pay attention. We need humor. We need drama. Look, when we're heading for a glacier, sometimes we don't see it. So we need hey, Tracy, do you realize that if you don't get those emails written this week, you're going to miss the March 1st deadline that you just promised to all these ADHD women? And then they're going to think you're a big, gigantic flake. Yeah, that's what I need because we have positive illusory bias and we will always gravitate towards believing that the best of all potential options is the one that will come true for us until it doesn't. Sometimes what we need most is a reality check because we haven't actually thought through, well, what's the domino effect of not getting those emails out, right? Finally, I believe that the best ADHD coaches, just like the best ADHD experts, they actually have ADHD. They understand how our brains work. They've been there. They've done that. They typically know what has been effective for them and what hasn't. Like with anything, if you have actual real world relevant experience, you're just going to be better at relating, at suggesting options and workarounds, at being empathetic no matter what the subject is. A life coach without ADHD training, without real world ADHD life experience, they're just never going to be as successful as a coach who has all this, period. Your coach, they need to understand how the ADHD brain works. If they haven't been trained as an ADHD coach, they likely don't. They would hear me talking about the fact that it's physically painful for me to sit down and write an email or go through, what my program and everything is like. They think I was nuts, or they just think I was lazy when I told them, look, I can't do it. It's literally physically painful. Yeah, Kate, I see you. I tried 3 ADHD coaches. The first 2 were bad with a big BAD, and the third one was amazing. So glad I didn't give up. You're absolutely right. ADHD coaches. Okay. Sorry, you guys. I'm looking for, how did my workbook disappear? It was just here. You understand, right? Okay, so under support, we've gotten through ADHD professionals. Okay, so now we are on community and connection. Sorry, there's a blank screen there, isn't there? Okay, give me a second just to take a sip of water. So part of the support prong also includes community and connection. ADHD 2.0, Edward Hallowell, I'm telling you, if you don't do anything, if you get nothing from this master series, and I don't get anything. I don't get anything from Ned Hallowell for this, but I just believe so much in this newest book that he wrote because it is so strength focused while also explaining what are some of the things that we struggle with and what are the things that we can do instead to really focus on making our symptoms better, but even more than that, really focusing on what our strengths are. So he talks about the importance of vitamin K. He calls that vitamin connection. It is so important to our ADHD brains. You know, with my AOK students, what I've noticed is that connection is almost all a value. That I see in their intelligence reports. So they put these reports together as far as, you know, for their values and strengths and superpowers and all that. And connection is almost always in their values. We tend as ADHDers to be very empathetic, kind souls who love people and constantly seek connection. And if you're sitting here saying, well, I don't love people. Yeah, I would say you're probably around the wrong people, right? You're not around your people. So it's probably, though, why few of us like cocktail parties or small talk, right? We're intense. We like interesting, deep conversations where we can really connect. Thank you, Sophia. That's so kind of you. Okay, so when we're talking about community and connection, good questions to ask are these. Do you know others with ADHD? Just knowing one person who you feel understands you and is like you is enormously helpful. I mean, even in our Facebook group and even here right now, right? When you see all of these ADHD women, and you see that, hey, they do struggle with similar things that I struggle with, that just reduces the shame and it makes us feel so much better about ourselves. Of course, there are meetups, there are online support groups, you know, at CHAD and Attitude Mag. I'm not sure if Attitude Mag has an online support group. But you can find them online everywhere. We have something in our state, and I think it's something that's all around the nation. They're called meetups. And I know in our area, we have several meetups. They've now gone online, but I'm sure once COVID kind of resolves itself and gets better, they'll go back to in person. So if you go to meetups and just put in your area and ADHD, I'm sure you can find a local support group. But there's also Facebook groups now too, right? Like ADHD for Smartass Women. And I know that there are Facebook groups for kids, you know, parents with ADHD children. And there are other Facebook groups that are just generally for ADHD people. So one of the reasons I think why my podcast has been so popular is because, again, there's a sense that I'm not alone. I'm bringing women on my podcast that, you know, you look at them, you'd say, yeah, they've been successful. Anybody would say that they're successful, but they share the things that they still struggle with. So it makes us, when we listen to this, realize that, again, I am not alone. This is just a different brain. I also think that the reason the podcast has been popular is I've connected a number of things in one place that doctors don't typically tell us are related to ADHD. And I think they don't tell us because honestly, they don't know. I'm trying to remember. I think I heard that most doctors get maybe 30 minutes of training on ADHD in medical school. And, you know, if you studied medicine 20 years ago, well, a lot has changed since then. And if you've learned nothing new, all you know is here's the stimulant medication, right? And it's about boys, hyperactive boys. But anyway, what I've done is I've connected a lot of things to ADHD, things like eating disorders and skin picking, and the fact that we tend to have a lot of crowns and root canals because of bruxism, where we're grinding our teeth. emotional sensitivity, a high startle reflex. Did you know that that's related to ADHD? I don't know about you, but if someone comes up behind me, oh my gosh, I'm terrible. And I've always been like that. And I've always wondered, why am I like that? Because I remember as a teenager, I remember someone saying something to me like that I was making that up, right? And I always wondered, well, how come other people don't do that and I do it? Why do I always startle like this? It's ridiculous. So, those were some of like the more, I guess, negative things, but there are also some really great things that we've always wondered about, right? What this interpersonal intuition. We can walk into a room and we just read people really well, even though we don't know them. Empathy, a connection with nature, a need to lead, drivenness. So this is why community is so important, because we start sharing information. We're not alone. Oh, you do that too. We discover that ADHD, it's not a character flaw. It's not a moral failing. It's just a different brain. And the more we share, the more we find people like ourselves, we feel less alone, and the shame is reduced. This is also why our environment is so important. Ask yourself, are you around others who love and support you just the way you are? And ask this in your career and in your personal life, in your friendships, everywhere. Okay, so number 3, our third prong, dopamine enhancers. So one of the trademarks of ADHD is low levels of the neurotransmitter dopamine. Due to this lack of dopamine, those of us with ADHD, we're just chemically wired to seek more dopamine because it increases our motivation and it stimulates our executive functioning. It just makes us feel good, right? We get positive emotion from it. So what if we created our own positive ways to increase our own dopamine? So what would our options be? Well, we all know about this one, right? Medication. And if you're one of the lucky 80 to 90%, it can be life-changing. Taken as prescribed, medication provides the most effective and immediate benefit of any treatment. And stimulant medication, by the way, it's been prescribed for over 50 years. It is a myth that giving stimulant medication to someone with substance use disorders or a predisposition to addictions, and you need to know with ADHD, we have a 5 to 10 times higher likelihood of addiction. It's a myth that this is going to cause more addiction or start anyone down this path of addiction. Numerous studies show an inverse relationship between drug therapy for ADHD and drug abuse. People with ADHD who receive appropriate treatment in childhood, almost always with stimulants, they're 50% less likely than their untreated peers to abuse drugs or alcohol in adolescence or young adulthood. Since 80% of addictions get started between the ages of 13 and 23, and since those with ADHD are far more prone to develop an addiction than the general population, and since taking stimulant medication reduces the risk of addiction later on, this is according to Drs. Hallowell and Dr. Rady, it makes a lot of sense to start a child on stimulant medication before the age of 13. Of course, you need that child's buy-off for a number of reasons. If they don't want to take it, it's likely not going to work. Well, first of all, they're not going to take it, right? That said, medication should only be part of treatment, even though that's the only thing that most ADHD professionals ever tell us about. So one of the things that I want to also say about medication is, again, this is an area where you need to pay attention to yourself. You are the expert on you. At least 20% of us struggle with medication. It makes our symptoms worse. We can develop, and if we already have latent anxiety, it can develop anxiety. It can, make you, depressed. You really need to pay attention while you're taking this medication. I know when we get diagnosed, we're thinking, oh my gosh, that's the quick fix. And for some people, it really is that good. But I think for many of us, it's not. And so we end up, I think I spent 2 years trying every medication known to man. And I couldn't even remember what I was like before because that became my new normal, right? Just feeling like crap. So really pay attention when you are taking medication. If you are feeling bad, get off of it. Part of it is my drivenness, right? And my intensity. And so the whole deal with medication was I was going to figure this out. Well, guess what? I'm a slow metabolizer, which means that you give me one little teeny bit, compared to everybody else. And any kind of chemical that, affects my brain, hormones and my brain, I just really struggle with. I mean, I can't even drink coffee. So that's how bad it is. So you need to really pay attention to yourself. Keep a log of how you're feeling so you know how you were feeling at the beginning and you know 1 month in, how are you feeling now? We forget how we were feeling. And suddenly this feeling like crap becomes our new normal. Okay, so what are we going to do for those of us who can't take medication? Well, we're going to talk about some non-pharmaceutical ways to increase dopamine. And my favorite one is exercise. So for those of us like me who haven't been successful with medication, and for those who are successful with medication, to make your medication even more effective, exercise is a great dopamine booster. In fact, according to Dr. John Ratey, who studied exercise and the brain, and he wrote about it in his book, Spark. It's an outstanding book. I highly recommend it. Exercise is as effective as a course of Adderall or Ritalin. When you exercise, you also turn on the frontal cortex of the brain. And that's the part of the brain, remember, that's responsible for your planning and your organizational skills. All it takes is getting your heart rate up to 70% maximum for at least 20 minutes. So, since medication doesn't work for me, I get up every morning and I work out. I can't remember where I mentioned it, but I have a Peloton. I know the Peloton is expensive, but it is worth every single penny to me because it is the perfect ADHD exercise equipment. It's challenging. I get to compete not only with my old score, but also with other people. I can do it first thing in the morning. And so I don't have to go anywhere. So there are no excuses. You know, I often don't feel like getting up and working out. But since I started treating exercise as medication, I almost always work out because I've connected my action, my exercising, with how good I'll feel after I work out and then for the rest of the day. I know that exercise helps me with everything from focus to anxiety to mood. I know that my cortisol levels are highest in the morning. I had them tested. So I can wake up kind of unsettled. Like, I don't know if you all can relate to this, where there's just this sense of dread, but you don't even know what it's about. Like, there's nothing bad going on. You're not worried about anything specifically. But I know that I can get rid of that in the drop of a hat once I start to exercise. Once I start exercising, I feel great. So that's what motivates me. If I feel that in the morning, you know, I am definitely working out. It's just a way to start the day out right, and it allows me to control how I feel. So I don't know what your form of exercise is, but as long as you're getting your heart rate up to 70% of max for 20 minutes, you are getting as much benefit as a dose of Adderall or Ritalin. And I really recommend you reading that book, Spark, especially if you have a child with ADHD. I actually read it for my son initially. I have always been big into working out. I was involved in, amateur bodybuilding and all. Like, I've just always been a gym rat. And I couldn't get my son to work out. And so I read Spark, hoping that that's what I would be able to do that. And one of the things that they recommend is a jump rope. And so I literally brought a jump rope into a school, and I was like, look, if he's being obstinate, go make him jump rope, And so now he uses a jump rope when he's struggling to get back his focus. So, okay. So the next thing that increases dopamine is nutrition. So what I eat and how much I eat makes a big difference to my cognition and just how I feel. I just cannot eat processed foods. I can't eat a lot of sugar and alcohol. It makes me feel worse and worse as I get older. So you need to test for yourself and see, does what you eat affect you negatively? I mean, I can tell you, I was probably less affected by it when I was younger. But again, the older I get, the more I struggle with it. So there is a dietitian and nutritionist. She came and talked to us on episode 84 of the podcast. It was all about ADHD and nutrition. Her name is Nicole DeMasi. She's lovely. And she created a great webpage for us that's all about ADHD and nutrition. And you can find it either in your workbook. in the links, but the most recent links. So you can tell if you've got the most recent workbook if the links are really big, as far as the font size is super large. That is the old workbook. The new workbook, it's 2 pages of links in training number 2, and Nicole DeMasi will be there. And her URL is Nicole, NicoleDemasi.com/ADHD if you want to look at that landing page that's all about ADHD and nutrition. So the foods, there are foods that naturally boost dopamine and serotonin. Foods like fatty fish, like salmon, walnuts, chia seeds, ground flax seeds, dark leafy greens, probably kale, right? Velvet beans and fava beans. So again, in ADHD 2.0, Hallowell and Rady also mentioned the importance of avoiding sugar. And Nicole mentions this too, because it promotes the production and release of dopamine. So you have to keep ingesting sugar to keep up that good dopamine feeling. And this can end up where you're just in this vicious cycle. Again, alcohol and sugar seem to affect a lot of ADHD women that I've personally spoken with, but you have to check and see for yourself, does it affect you? And it may also be that you're like me, you're fine with all of this, but then you get to a certain age and suddenly you're affected, and it creates a lot of negative emotion, like that feeling of dread that I was talking about in the morning. Yeah, that is what I wake up if I've been drinking the night before. And I've gotten to the point where, even one drink affects me. I mean, it doesn't mean that I don't drink one drink every once in a while socially, but anything more than one drink, and certainly more than 2. And I am like, it was like I drank 4 drinks before, right? Double. Anyway, so be aware and test it. Test and see. Does your diet, what you ingest, what you eat, ingest, is that eating too? Whatever you eat, does that affect your ADHD symptoms? Does it affect your dopamine levels? Do you feel better? Do you feel more positive emotion when you're eating well? Okay, this one. Oh God, I hate this one. Sleep. Sleep is so important. And we know that ADHD people, ADHD women, have higher rates of sleep disturbances, whether that's that we can't get to sleep, we wake up and can't get back to sleep, or like me, you struggle with revenge bedtime procrastination, where we think sleep is just a total waste of time. And nighttime, like late nighttime, it's the first time where we can actually do exactly what we want. So we want to eke out every last minute of the day, right? We just think sleep is a waste of time. We hate it. We don't want to go to bed. Well, we need sleep. Sleeping naturally boosts dopamine and serotonin. So I think I had mentioned before that I wrote an article on in Attitude on revenge bedtime procrastination. It was this last month's issue, and the new things that I've tried. So there's a lot you can do around sleep. If you have any questions about sleep, certainly ask that for the Q&A. Put the question in the Q&A, and I could share some things that have been successful for me related to this revenge bedtime procrastination, this unwillingness and inability to get into bed on time. And it goes in cycles too, I should mention. Nature is next. This is a common theme that I've seen among a lot of ADHD women. We love to be outdoors. We love to garden. We love to walk. We love animals. Yeah, go get a dog. That is an instant dopamine increaser, isn't it? Dogs are part of nature, right? And nature increases dopamine. So pay attention to how you feel when you're out in nature. So I live in the country on 6.5 acres, and this property, I used to complain all the time because it's so much and it's so much to take care of, but it really saved me in the time of COVID. So I use, my husband cut a 1/2 mile track around the property, and I use the property. I go on walks with my dog as a way to jumpstart myself when I'm struggling with focus and concentration in the middle of the workday. And sometimes it's really hard to pull myself away from my work because I feel bad, and I always feel like I'm behind. I always feel like I'm not doing enough, right? I'm sure a lot of you can relate. And I'm telling you, every single time I pull myself away and I go on that walk and I get out into nature and I just pause all that crap that's going on in my brain about, I'm not moving fast enough, I'm not doing enough, I just feel so much better after, and I get so much more done. So absolutely, nature is important. Okay, what else increases our dopamine? Well, and I think we talked about this a little bit on Monday. We need to be creating. If we're not creating something, it opens us up to addictive behaviors. Creating makes us happy and it generates positive emotion. It's why I'm constantly in awe of all the things that ADHD women create. We are not happy unless we're creating. And creating can be anything that holds our interest. It can be art, it can be music, cooking, building a business, gardening, knitting, decorating, writing, designing, entertaining, anything that engages our creativity and generates positive emotion. So, what next? So, an adjunct of creating is getting into action, right? For me, this was a game changer. Once I discovered that I could control how I feel by getting into action, especially by doing those things that I really wanted to move forward, like my goals, right? But it was stuff that I feared. That is when I cracked my ADHD code. I think you all have heard me talk about this fear that I had about live video. Well, once I cracked that code and I realized, oh my God, this sparks such positive emotion every time I get out there and I'm on live video, and it's not that hard and it's actually kind of fun. And so here I am, right? um, so think about how proud you feel when you accomplish something that's really important to you. That's dopamine firing. So, the more you step into fear by doing that which moves your agenda forward, the better you feel. We feel proud of ourselves. And I learned I could control how I feel through action. That also means that I could also control my ADHD symptoms through action. The best explanation I've seen of this is, again, in ADHD 2.0, and I'm going to attempt it here. So in our brain, we have two networks, the DPN and the DMN. When we're doing anything, we're in the TPN, and that is called the task positive network. And so that's the network that lights up. But when we stop the task or we allow our mind to wander, what happens is our ADHD brains, they default to the DMN, or the default mode network. Now, the DMN is the seed of our imagination and creativity. So it's not all bad at all. But this is also the network that allows us to go into our past and we get stuck there. So this is where rumination occurs. So it's also called the demon network. So for those of us with ADHD, we can get stuck there in the DMN, right? Which leads us to highly critical, negative, gloomy thoughts. Because with ADHD, we have this malfunction in the DMN. It's a malfunction of the imagination, right? So how do you get back into the TPN, into the task positive network? You get into action. You do something. You create something. You jump rope. You run outside. You pick up your dog. You write. You cook something. You build a business. You work out. You do anything. And that jumps you right back into the TPN and gets you to stop that rumination. So we need to get into our bodies when we're in our head doing that ruminating thing. Okay, we're at number 4, positive emotion. This is probably my favorite prong, and it's different from our previous prong of dopamine enhancers because the dopamine enhancers are more specific, like meditation, exercise, diet, sleep, nature, etc. Look, positive emotion, dopamine enhancers, of course, they both fire our dopamine, right? But with positive emotion, I want you to think more about yourself specifically. What do you do and who do you do it with that generates positive emotion for you? What makes you proud of you? Look, everyone feels better when they're in positive emotion. But for those of us with ADHD, it's a necessity. We have to be in positive emotion using our strengths in order to be successful. Neurotypical people, they have a much easier time doing things that they don't want to do, but they know that they have to do. We, on the other hand, if we aren't interested, if we don't want to do something, we're just not going to do it. We can't do it. Or at a minimum, we require so much energy to get it done that it's debilitating. When we're in positive emotion, however, we're motivated to move forward towards our goals because dopamine is firing. So it's especially important that we know what creates positive emotion in us. So many times I hear that procrastination is just fear, right? You hear neurotypicals saying that all the time. Procrastination is just fear. Well, I can tell you that there are many times that I'm procrastinating all over the place, and it has nothing at all to do with fear. I know how to do it. I have no fear about doing it. I just don't want to do it. I physically can't do it. For many of us, it's not fear. we just really struggle to do that thing because there's just so much negative emotion around it. Look, I hate to write, but I love to have written. I don't know who's the author who said that, but I stole that years ago. I'm a good writer, a strong writer. I told you I write for Attitude Magazine, but I'm an excruciatingly slow writer. I know I can do it, but sitting down and writing those emails for this series, it literally took me weeks. I just could not do it. When I thought about it, I finally decided that even with my VAs, the bottleneck was always me in getting things done, and it always involved writing. And this was no surprise because I had so much negative emotion around writing, just starting to write. And I felt guilty paying a copywriter to do my writing because I felt like a fraud if I didn't do it myself, right? It wouldn't be my voice. It wouldn't really be me talking. I had to do this myself. I had to do everything myself. I think a lot of us with ADHD, we get stuck in that perfectionism and that excellence. Well, excellence is one of my core values. So finally, I just had to bite the bullet and I hired a writer. Her name's Esther Nagel. She's lovely, to help me start with my writing because it finally dawned on me that by not getting these emails written, it was actually creating so much negative emotion in me and stopping me from helping more ADHD women. And Esther has this wonderful way that she works with people in their writing where she kind of gives you a structure. So you feel like, okay, this is my writing, but she helps you basically process what it is that you want to say so that you can get it on paper. Because if you're anything like me, it's the starting that is so difficult. So once I got some help around writing, I felt so much better. There was so much more positive emotion, and that bottleneck flushed itself out literally in one Saturday. It was insane. So positive emotion, we know it generates more positive emotion, and in turn, it motivates us to do what we want to do. This motivation helps our focus, which in turn translates into more action. We do the stuff. We check off the to-dos on our to-do list. We write the damn emails, right? And what happens when we get things done? We get the results we want. We accomplish what we want to accomplish. And for me, that included helping more women with ADHD. And guess what? That then continues the cycle. Your new thoughts are now, wow, I did it. Good for me. So we are proud of ourselves, right? We're feeling accomplished. We feel like, hey, I can do this. We're feeling appreciative. We're feeling satisfaction. And all of this translates into more action, results, and dopamine. It's a cycle. We are also gold star people. If any of you listen to my podcast, you know I talk about gold stars all the time. We come alive with praise, affirmation, and encouragement. And guess what? Yeah, this all generates more positive emotion. The dopamine enhancers that we talked about previously, those are specific strategies. For the positive emotion prong, I want you to think more about yourself specifically. Again, what do you do and who do you do it with that generates positive emotion for you? What makes you proud? You know, do you have a list of people? And if you don't, you should make it, that love and support you just the way you are. They believe in you. What do you do that makes you especially proud? Are you a kind human? Are you a great, understanding parent, even though, maybe you're not so good at the administrative tasks around keeping a home? So what? You have happy kids. Are you fun? Do you love to read? Are you a lifelong learner? Do you work? Do you do work that gives you a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction? So music could be on this list as well. There's a lot of things that could be on this list as well. It could be on the dopamine enhancer list too, right? Listening to the music you love, that makes your brain release more dopamine. There's a chemical link between music and emotion. But depending on past experiences and memories, you can listen to certain music that elicits positive emotion, and you can listen to music that elicits negative emotion because it kind of sends you back in time, right? The memory and the emotion, it's all tied together. So be wary of that. But I know a lot of women really, they can't live without music. Well, I know both my kids, they cannot live without music. Number 5, change your perspective. So this is a really, really important one, especially because what we're gunning to do here is to fall in love with our brain, right? So maybe what we need to do is change our perspective. So, your perspective, it's the way you see something, right? And often, those of us with ADHD, we don't see what others around us see. Our ADHD, we know this. It makes us so creative and vividly imaginative. It also gives us the ability to hyperfocus. Sometimes we hyperfocus on good things, but often we don't. Our brains, they have a negativity bias. Bad is always stickier than good. I've heard the statistic that we need 5 things to counteract one bad thing. And this is the human brain in general, but it's especially the ADHD brain. We talked about this on Monday a bit, but I think it's worth a refresher. Brains remember negative thoughts more readily than positive thoughts. One of the features of our brains is that we're constantly scanning the horizon looking for danger. We have this prehistoric part of our brain, right, that was designed to keep us safe from the saber-toothed tiger, but there's no longer a danger from a saber-toothed tiger. Our brains don't care. They still have a negativity bias, and they're prone to, rumination. This ability we have to hyperfocus on the negative stuff. That is rumination. And it can lead to RSD, which we talked about in our first training as well. Ruminating comes from the Latin word for chewing cud. You know how cows grind up, swallow, regurgitate, and then re-chew their feed? So what happens is we develop this style of thinking where we're like a hamster on a hamster wheel. We're running, but we're getting nowhere. And we'll obsess about past problems, a loss, any kind of setback. But you just keep thinking about it and you never move forward to action. You do nothing, so nothing changes. Your problem remains unsolved, so you end up feeling worse and worse about it. When you ruminate, you dwell repetitively on negative thoughts. We also struggle with transitions. We have problems starting and stopping. So guess what happens when we start ruminating? We can't stop. As you ruminate, you deepen the grooves in your brain, which controls your fight or flight response, and you increase your levels of cortisol or stress hormone. And rumination is lonely because you're cutting yourself off from other people. You're dissecting conversations and you're attributing ill will to friends that were never intending that at all. And the reason this is serious is that this tendency to overthink is linked to dysregulated eating, alcoholism, depression, anxiety, insomnia, high blood pressure, and many other health problems. So, why do we ruminate? Well, because it focuses the mind and it provides mental stimulation. So it's the brain's way of entertaining itself. And who ruminates? Primarily women. Part of it is how we're socialized, but part of it is biology. Women, they just tend to care more about relationships, so they tend to analyze them more. Men tend to want to just act even before they've thought the problem through, right? This is likely why women suffer more depression than men. So now that we know what rumination is, what can we do about it? What tools can we add to our ADHD user's manual? And how can we change our perspective? Well, first of all, we can ask, is what we keep thinking really true? This is why ADHD coaches can be so helpful. We have these beliefs that just aren't true. And when we're called on them, it forces us to really ask the question, is this really true? I'll often have a client who has a huge story that they tell me, and I'll ask them, is that really true? And they look at me aghast, like no one has ever asked them that. They've never considered that maybe it's not true, that just because you have thoughts doesn't mean those thoughts are true. They have no idea that they are in control of their thoughts, and they can choose what to believe and what not to believe. The choice map is another great way to change your perspective. It was developed by Marilee Adams in her book, Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. Again, the link is in your workbook. Can never remember what that thing's called. A lot of coaches use this book and its principles. I have it. I highly recommend it. And the whole idea behind the choice map is that the questions you ask yourself can determine your happiness. So you can see the little man there on the start, right? So something happens that isn't good, and you can either go to the left and apply the learner path, or you can go to the right and apply the judger path or the judger mindset. So let's look at some judger questions. You could ask, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with them? Whose fault is it? Why doesn't anything ever work for me? Or why is everyone so stupid and annoying? Why bother? Why should I care? How do you think you're going to feel when you ask these questions of yourself? Yeah, pessimistic, negative, stressed, reactive, emotionally dysregulated. What about if you instead asked yourself some learner questions? Questions like, what do I want and what are my goals? What works? What can I learn here? What are the facts? What am I assuming? What's possible? And how do you think these questions are going to make you feel? Yeah, they're going to make you feel more optimistic, more hopeful, maybe more curious, maybe more willing to look at what's possible. But it's going to require you to pause rather than just impulsively react, right? It requires a shift in mindset. Sounds a lot like, I don't know if you've heard of growth mindset versus fixed mindset. So, with learner questions, you don't have this sense that the questioner has failed, but rather that they're always learning and stretching and growing. So, that brings us to mindfulness and meditation. And don't run away. I was so, like I used to joke about, I'm anti woo, right? So not into any of this. I was kind of a boom, boom, boom kind of person. You just buck up and you do it. I didn't even barely believe in therapy, unless there was trauma, of course. And even then, I wasn't sure what it was. Mindfulness and meditation is huge. It is another quiver in our change your perspective prong, right? What a prong are we in? Are we in 5? We're almost done, you guys. Hang on there with me. Yeah, we're in prong 5. So I want to introduce you to Lydia Zilowska. She is a psychiatrist who specializes in mindfulness-based approaches to adult ADHD. She, along with Dan Siegel, co-founded UCLA's Mindfulness Awareness Research Center. All the links are in your workbook. And she led the first study of mindfulness training in ADHD adults. Dr. Siegel, by the way, is the individual who connected mindfulness with brain science. So Dr. Zilowska wrote The Mindfulness Prescription for Adult ADHD. It is, again, in your book list. It is, in your workbook, but it is also on the ADHD book list, tracyotsuka.com/book list. And this was a big deal. So let me tell you why. I had promised you before that I was going to talk to you about neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's capacity to change and adapt. Brain scientists used to think that neuroplasticity only occurred in the brain during childhood. But now we know that the brain, listen to this, can actively adapt and change throughout life. And guess what? Attention is a key factor in neuroplasticity. Where we direct our attention determines which neural circuits become engaged and modified. This new understanding of neuroplasticity, it's completely changed our thinking about mindfulness and meditation. By repeatedly engaging our brain in a positive way through mindfulness or meditation, we can affect the function and even the structure of our brains. So Dr. Sarah Lazar from Harvard showed in a study that long-term meditators actually had thicker, more developed brain regions related to attention, self-monitoring, and emotional regulation. And if you're over 40, you're going to have to listen to this. You're going to be happy to hear that the prefrontal cortex, that's responsible for our executive functions, right? Think working memory, self-motivation, planning, and problem solving. So that prefrontal cortex was it just women? I don't think it was just women. It was in ADHD people over 40. It didn't have the typical age-related thinning for those who meditated. So that alone should make you meditate, right? And just so you know, meditation, mindfulness, you don't have to be sitting still. There's all different kinds of, because you're probably sitting here thinking, I have ADHD, I'm totally hyperactive. How can I do this? There are so many different ways of meditating that don't involve sitting still, that don't involve you, 30 minutes. I mean, literally, it can be 5 minutes a day, and that makes a difference. And I'm going to give you some resources as we move forward. So, anyway, the area of the brain that is enhanced by mindfulness or meditation training is exactly those areas of the brain that are affected by ADHD, namely the prefrontal cortex and the anterior cingulate cortex. This means that if you get into your head and you're ruminating with a lot of doom and gloom and you're telling yourself, I can't change, I'll never get this done, I have no strengths, it's the trauma, and so I can't change, you are wrong. Neuroplasticity shows us that change is always possible. And everything changes, right? When you start paying attention, when you teach yourself how to pause, you can then see your mental and emotional habits and typical patterns of reacting. You can notice tendencies to get lost in the future or the past and return yourself to the moment. You can see life more clearly as it is, and you can bring more intention to facing whatever is happening. You can choose to respond to your experience instead of reacting, and then when you fail to do so, right, you can give yourself a break. Along the way, you rewire your brain. So it would be like me saying to myself, hey, Tracy, that's me avoiding conflict again. Did you see how you did that? I need to pause and think about what I want, Tracy. Tracy, what is important to me? This time, Tracy, I'm going to try something different. You are literally creating those thoughts in your brain, which are so much more helpful than the ruminating, I'm a loser, I screwed up again, I can't do this, right? So what you learn how to do is you learn how to observe your negative emotions as temporary and passing instead of right away acting on them, right? Just impulsively, we just jump in, right? That's how you learn to regulate your emotions. So let me just say it again. Neuroplasticity and thereby mindfulness and meditation changes the structure and function of brain regions that support your executive functions, which is where our ADHD creates deficit, and that includes emotional dysregulation or regulation, right? So there are resources on, I think it's page 9 of the individual training for number 2, the workbook for number 2. So the mindfulness prescription for adult ADHD, the 8-step program for strengthening attention. That was Lydia Zalowska's book. Episode 50 of my podcast is with former psychotherapist, now ADHD coach, Diane Wingert. She used to teach at USC, I believe. And this is fantastic. If you're sitting here telling me I can't meditate, you need to listen to this podcast. She makes it so accessible and frankly fun. And it's called ADHD and Meditation That Even You Can Do. And then episode number 53 is a podcast that I did on neuroplasticity, mindfulness, meditation, and ADHD. The UCLA Mindfulness Awareness Center, they have an app. And again, the link is, it's a really good link. And it's a really good app. And the link is in the workbook. And then this app, it's called the Waking Up app. And it is an app developed by neuroscientist Sam Harris. And I love this app. And I think many ADHD brains will like it too, because it doesn't just give you the meditations or the trainings. It also explains why it works. And Amy Kane, Dr. Amy Kane, she's an infectious disease and genetics expert, and she was on my podcast, and she's the one who recommended it. And so I went ahead and downloaded it. It's a little pricey. I think it's $99 a year, but I think it is well worth it. And there's a 7-day trial, so you can try it. So again, you'll find all these links and others from in Training 2 in the workbook at the end of Training 2. Okay, future versus past focused. Where are we? I think we're almost done with 5, right? Yep, we're almost done with 5. And then we just have a few workarounds and you will be on your merry way. Okay, being future versus past focus. So what else can also help us change our perspective? Excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of water. Well, being future versus past focus. And I talk a lot about this in episode 93 of my podcast. It's called ADHD, Positive Emotion and Being Future Focused. Again, it's in the resource center of your workbook. And I want to give credit where credit is due. I first heard Brooke Castillo talk about this concept. She runs the Life Coach School. So people who are past focused use the fact that they don't know how to do something as a reason not to do it. People who are future focused, they don't let the fact that we don't know how to do something stop us from doing it. So do you remember when you were young, like if you didn't know how to do something, you just figured it out, right? If you wanted to learn how to skateboard or snowboard or play the guitar, you just did it. It never dawned on you to even think about the fact that you didn't know how to do something. Hell, you didn't know how to do anything. You just jumped right in and tried. Most of us, right? So when do we stop trying? When do we start using our past as an indicator of what's possible in our future? It seems to happen somewhere in our mid to late 20s. I don't know. We're out of school. We start to settle down. Maybe we have a couple of kids, maybe early 30s, maybe we buy a house and all of a sudden we become past focused rather than future focused. We don't do anything anymore that we don't already know how to do. And we won't try anything new because we use the fact that we don't know how to do something as the reason why we shouldn't do it. It's no wonder everything stays exactly the same, right? And I would suspect that for some of you really hyperactive, entrepreneurial ADHDers, maybe you don't struggle so much with this, but I bet you for some inattentas, you can really relate to this. So because, and this is really important, everything that is possible, which is everything, and we often don't even realize just how possible most of our dreams really are, it's all built from our future, not from our past. Think about it. If you only build from your future, what are you going to get? Yeah, what you already have, right? And that's fine only if you don't want something more. So the only way to build something new is by getting uncomfortable and acting and not thinking about acting, but actually doing it, right? And learning in an area you know little or nothing about. You don't know what you're doing while you're doing it. None of us do, but you're learning. And before you know it, you do know what you're doing. And this is, remember this, getting into action. This is what we're talking about. When we were talking about creativity and the TPN and the DMN and the importance of action, here's another way to change your perspective around why we really need to be moving forward, whatever our creative pursuit is, and how to do it. It's about action and becoming future focused. So why is this so important for the ADHD brain? Well, first, I'm sorry, but we have more of a need to live a life of meaning and live to our potential than neurotypicals. I am certain of it. I suspected this, and so I posted a poll in ADHD for Smartass Women, and I asked, do you feel as if you need to live to your potential and create a life of meaning more than your neurotypical peers? 98% of the respondents said yes. Living to my potential is almost always a top value listed by my AOK women. We need to lead rather than follow. We need to be creating. We need high stimulation because we can be bored. Remember Ned Hallowell? Boredom is our kryptonite. And remember, when we're bored, we're not creating and we are more likely to struggle with addiction. We are dopamine seekers. So we need to find ways to seek our dopamine that's positive, right? That affects our life and generates good, positive emotion. And I just realized that slide is not lined up. Ugh. Okay, we're in step 6. Let's develop some workarounds. It's the last prong in our ADHD user's manual. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to share what works for me, but this is the prong that's going to take a lot of individual testing to see what actually works for you. Number 1, if you do nothing else, I recommend the Apple Watch. It is my favorite tech tool. I have a podcast on it, episode 30. How the Apple Watch saved my ADHD brain. There's also a landing page. I will tell you that I need to update it because there are things that I don't use now and that things that I do use now, but it's still my favorite piece of tech for the ADHD brain. I use the alarms. I no longer have to wash my clothing and my family's clothing. Well, everybody kind of pitches in, so it's not like me out there doing it, but I don't have to wash it 5 times before I finally get it dry, right, and folded. I also don't burn food anymore because I set my alarms. The Find My Phone feature, it also has, so on the Apple Watch, there's a Find My Phone feature. You swipe up on the watch face and your phone starts to ding. That is worth the price of admission all by itself. So if you're like me, where you can literally be running around screaming, where's my phone? Where's my phone? And it's literally in your hand. Yeah. Have you done that? I do that regularly. I have literally had my Apple Watch on. My my phone is in my hand. I swipe up and it rings in my hand. So I love it. But usually it's in the couch or it's under a bunch of papers or it's in the car. But I love that feature. I also use an app called Fantastical that brings my Google Calendar. You can see right there, Dr. Edward Hallowell podcast, that brings my Google Calendar to the center of my watch face. This all connects to my Alexa. I use an Alexa and Google Calendar, and Alexa will announce my appointments 10 minutes in advance out loud, which I love. And trying to remember what else I was going to tell you. And I get a reminder from Google Calendar and it shows up on my Apple Watch. So how can I miss appointments? I don't anymore. I also, you can see that little red circle in the center there. That's my Bear app. And I love Bear. You can store anything on Bear. Everything. I store, my kids' paint colors from their bedrooms from years ago. I store anything that I don't want to forget, books I want to read, movies I want to see, work stuff, podcast ideas. Everything goes in my Bear app. And I love Bear because there's no files. I don't need to save anything by files because then I have to sit there and remember, oh gosh, where did I put that thing, right? Versus the Bear app, I just search for whatever it is I'm looking for, and there it is. Every time. So with the Bear app on my watch, I can also send audio clips of things that I need to remember. So if I'm on my Peloton and I'm working out and I remember something, I just click the little Bear link right there and one button and it goes, I can record an audio clip and it goes right to Bear. And so I don't forget it. I also use the Apple Watch to track my workouts and my sleep. I use an app called HeartWatch. The Peloton links to my Apple Watch. I use the Apple Watch as my morning alarm. And what I love about it is it's not this gross ringing alarm, which just makes me angry. It's it's called haptic feedback. And so it's like this little vibration that you feel, on your arm. And I'm just much more receptive to that. So, okay. Second, Pomodoro method. Many of you have probably heard about this. It's all about getting work done when you're procrastinating and you don't want to do it. So the Pomodoro method was developed by an Italian university student who used a kitchen timer shaped like a tomato, hence the name Pomodoro, to get his work done. The technique works like this. You choose a task that you don't want to do. You set a timer for 25 minutes and you just start. You don't give your head time to think about it. You just start. You work on the task until the timer rings, and then you take a short 3 to 5 minute break. And I guess after doing this 4 times, then you take a 50. Oh, I'm so sorry. There's the Pomodoro. There's the tomato. After doing this 4 times, you take a 15 to 30 minute break. That method doesn't work so great with me, but I have a modified version. I use something called a Datix cube. So this is a timer that has different times on each side of the cube. And the idea behind the Pomodoro method is you can do anything for 25 minutes, right? We tend to have problems starting. So this method helps us start. So I play this game with myself and I shut my brain down, the part that tells me that I don't want to start, and I just start. If I don't want to continue after the 25 minutes is up, the deal I've struck with myself is I don't have to. So I turn my cube on the 25-minute side. I stop my thinking and I just get into action. I just do it. The timer fires up and I start. And you know what? I have never stopped after that first 25 minutes. For me, it is always about the starting. So you have to test this strategy. You have to see what works for you. For some, the real Pomodoro method of 25 minutes, of work and 5 minutes of break works best. For me, if I stop for 5 minutes, I'm not coming back. So I just keep going. I'm in hyperfocus. I'm using it. There are also all kinds of online Pomodoro phone apps, or you can get a real Pomodoro tomato timer. You can get my Datix Cube, or you can even use a timer on your phone or watch. What's next? Body doubling. Body doubling. Many of us with ADHD, we've discovered that working with someone else in the room, while counterintuitive, is really effective for our brains. We're able to get things done much more quickly this way. And no one really knows why this is. I think for me, it kind of quells my FOMO, like my fear of missing out, like having to be stuck here and doing this. And I really want to be doing other things, right? And I do talk about some ideas of why body doubling might work in episode 14 of my podcast, What's a Body Double? And how can it help me get my work done? So when you are working side by side with someone, this is called using a body double. For me, going to a coffee shop works. So I use other people as my body double. They don't even know about it. And the noise, I love it. It's almost like it becomes white noise and it just kind of gets me into the zone. For some of us, having a friend over who's quietly working with us, but you're not talking to them. They're just doing their own work. Virtual body doubling has become really popular with COVID too. And there is an application called FocusMate. I think it's focusmate.com. And we have our own FocusMate group called ADHD for Smartass Women. I think FocusMate charges $5 for unlimited sessions, or you get 3 sessions a week for free. And there is also a podcast episode, a young woman named Rachel, and I think she's done 1,800 FocusMate sessions. She literally built her life around it. Okay, planners. I really wanted to talk about this for a few minutes. I just spent a year developing, AOK every day. And yes, that's a crappy photo. I took it. I'm going to get professional photos soon. But I learned so much that I want to share some universal planning rules, because we did a beta, and I had 100 women who showed up every Saturday morning, and there was a Facebook group, and I learned so much from them and how they best plan. So I want to share that with you. So number one, again, this, you're the expert on you. There are no other experts. Nothing works for everyone. You have to try and see what works for you, and that includes how to use any planning system. Number two, out of sight is out of mind. For a planner to work, it has to be easy in and easy out. With a normal planner, think about it. You have to go to the right month, the right week. I talked about this yesterday, and then the right day. For AOK every day, what I did is I created 1-page weekly cards that are loose instead of a book, right? So it's on cardstock. It's one card with your to-dos. It sits on your desk. It doesn't go anywhere. It's easy to get in and out of. It's right there, so you use it. Number three, positive emotion. Is that number three? I think I'm off my numbers. Okay. We know that positive emotion is key with this too. If you're not positive emotion, you're not going to get anything done. Number four, this is where we are different from neurotypicals. Manage your energy, not your time. If your planning system doesn't generate positive emotion, you are not going to continue with it. It's why we have so many planners, right? We're always trying something new. We get positive emotion from buying them, from receiving them, but not so much from using them. And I know that a lot of neurotypicals, they swear by this thing called time blocking. And some of you may have success scheduling your tasks by time blocking. Most of us, though, won't. Primarily, again, because of emotion, right? We don't know when we're going to feel like doing it. So scheduling it is usually not effective. We just won't do it. And then we're going to beat ourselves up for not doing the thing when we time blocked it for. So then we feel nothing but negative emotion, which we know is going to just kill our motivation. You can try time blocking, but if it doesn't work, don't try it again and then beat yourself up for not being able to do it their way. Stop trying to do things the way neurotypicals say you should do them. My energy is so negative around time blocking, I can't do it. I need more freedom. I'll get it done, but I want to do it when I feel like doing it, either during that day or even during that week. However you use any planning system, positive emotion has to be a huge component of it. When you feel positive emotion, you will continue. Remember, we're dopamine seekers. When you don't, you won't. So the questions that you always want to ask yourself are, how can I make this fun so I do it? And how can I make this more challenging so I do it? So here are some planning tips. Forget perfection and focus on progress. Some days you're going to be super productive. Other days you won't. Some days I do so much that I blow any neurotypical out of the water, but then the rest of the week might be really slow, right? If you can look at the week as a whole, the month as a whole, and see that you have actually moved a lot forward, that is going to generate a lot more positive emotion than looking at all the things you don't get done for that one day. And in truth, no one could have gotten those 30 things done, right? We are ridiculous as far as how hard we are on ourselves. You don't have to go fast. You just have to go forward. It's the beating ourselves up that is so unproductive. Again, if you're not in positive emotion, you won't get anything done. When you're frustrated, remember what you feel like when you're successful. If you have a bad day, learn from it. Don't beat yourself up about it. Tweak whatever you're doing to make you more able to go forward next time. If that means you have to add one thing on your to-do list and only one thing to get it done and feel positive emotion, start there. This is key. Set a weekly goal that doesn't have a due date. I want you to choose something that's been hanging on your I want to do this list for weeks or months. Doing this one thing gives me more positive emotion than anything because it makes me feel so much more in control. I'm just not accomplishing things that are due or putting out other people's fires, right? I am moving forward that one thing which is important to me. And that's exactly what Saturday morning planning sessions do. Saturday morning planning sessions have changed my life. I spend no more than 25 minutes planning the upcoming week on Saturday mornings. Saturday morning provides structure because it gets all the, I need to do this stuff out of my head, right? It reduces overwhelm. It builds an awareness around what I actually do get done every day. And it allows me to choose what is it that I, not anyone else, but what is it that I would like to devote this next week to? So I'm running my life instead of letting it run me. And then once I'm done, I have this ease and peace about the coming week so I can enjoy my weekend. I guess Friday afternoons would work well too. So what else? Always ask yourself, how do I make this simpler? Sometimes your I need to stop doing this list needs to be bigger than your to-do list. You can do anything, but you cannot do everything. With my 100 AOK Everyday Beta Women, what became very clear to me is we tend to have way too much on our to-do list. And so, of course, we come up short. Then we beat ourselves up instead of looking at what we actually did accomplish. I often tell women who feel like they're not getting anything done to make a done list of everything that they've actually accomplished. They're usually shocked because they're so convinced that they're not getting anything done until they actually look at that done list. The key to success is to make sure that there is one big goal that's just for you, that you really want to accomplish, that you are moving forward a little piece at a time every week. Remember, we have these interest-driven brains. When we're interested and we're working on that we're interested in, we can be highly successful. Keep it simple. When all else fails, ask yourself, how do I make this simple? Simple is easy. So you're going to need to just test and see what works for you. So I'm just going to touch on this really quickly, but I want to get you some information on why we struggle with time. And we could spend days on this subject of time and being time blind and planning. I have 2 episodes of the podcast that go into depth on this. Episode 8 is called Why Am I Always Late? Episode 9 is called Practical Strategies for Being on Time and Planning Better. Our ADHD brains prefer to live in an unconstrained flow of time. It's why I'm not on time in this podcast. It was supposed to be 90 minutes, but hey, right? We want to live in an unconstrained flow of time where we can move smoothly from one thing to another when we feel like it. That's the natural flow for our brain. And it's because we don't see or feel time. We can't feel how long 15 minutes is. Many of us also can't see 15 minutes on a clock, which is why we struggle with digital clocks because they're just numbers, right? So for us, an analog clock is so much better so that we can learn what time passing looks like. We're easily distracted. We're all about the bright, shiny. And so we can have the best laid plans. This is why we're also creative, right? And all of a sudden we're doing something else. We hyper-focus, right? We can't start, but then when we do start, we can't stop and we just want to finish. So we keep going. We have working memory issues. We forget what we're supposed to be working on. Yep. Emotional regulation. We have this idea that, well, I don't feel like it. I don't want to make that decision. We struggle with emotional dysregulation. ADHD, it's ultimately about time management and emotion. It's not a character or moral issue. We're late. We're poor planners because of neurobiology, so we need some workarounds. And I want to point out, too, that some of us don't struggle with this at all. We're great with time. My son, for example, he's great with time. So I want to share with you 2 final tips that have really worked for me that start my day off on time. And that is the key. If you can start your day off on time, then everything is better, right? Versus if you're all stressed out when you're starting your day and you're just completely emotionally dysregulated. So, timers. Number 1, the shower timer. I could literally lose 45 minutes in the shower. I'm a creative. I get lost in my head. And so I have a shower timer that I set for, it depends how much time I have. I have one for 5 minutes and one for 10 minutes. And then I have this specific timer. I've had 2 of these, one in the shower and one in on my makeup mirror. I have two different ones right now, but I also have this timer on my makeup mirror in my bathroom. So it is front and center. I use timers on my Apple Watch all time. I told you, for my laundry, for cooking. I also use timers to test my time blindness. So I use them to guesstimate how long something takes me, and then I see if I was in fact right. And I notice that the more I play this game, the more sense I get around how long these things actually take. Because I don't know about you, but I can get somewhere one time in 20 minutes, right? It is the perfect day. It's a holiday. There is no traffic. And for some reason, that is the day that I use to determine how long it's going to take me to, for example, like get to the office. It's ridiculous. I also suggest that you put the time, and someone in our Facebook group, I think, recommended this, and I've been doing it, and it works so much better. Put the time you have to leave on your calendar. Don't put the time that the appointment is. Okay, so we are just about there. Now, this is your 6-prong ADHD user's manual. And what you're going to do is you're going to build your own, right? You're going to use the workbook and your notes to flesh out your ideas. And then I want you to make a point of taking those ideas and filling in your one-page manual. This is the plan that you're going to start with to test what works best for you and your brain. Please don't skip this step. We always skip this step. We have notes all over the place, and then we don't do anything with them. When it's on one page, when it's front and center, when it's easy to get in and out of, we will actually use it. If you're having a bad day and you need to generate some positive emotion, or you need to remember, wait, now, what are the things that increase my dopamine? Or what are my options for connection? I'm really feeling like I need to connect. You have them here in one spot. Another idea is to laminate this one-page ADHD user's manual and then use a dry erase pen to update it as you test what works for you and what doesn't. I've given you two versions of this one-page ADHD user's manual because I know that all our brains are different. If you prefer something more visual like this or something more linear, we have a linear version in the workbook as well. I don't want you to panic about this. I don't want you to think, oh my God, I'm so flooded, I don't even know where to start. What I want you to do is just go through the notes that you made in the workbook and just put 2 or 3 things in each one of these sections that you can start working on. And then it could be that, you know what, this week I'm going to work on education. Next week, I'm going to work on support. The week after that, I'm going to work on dopamine enhancers. Or you can be one of these types that just jumps all in, and you're going to create the whole user's manual initially, and then you're going to decide what are you going to work on first. I think the most important thing to work on is probably education, really learning about the ADHD brain, and then maybe bumping over to perspective. You know, everybody is different, and we can talk about this more tomorrow in our Facebook Live, but I don't want you to get flooded and overwhelmed by this. If it takes you 1 month to get through education, it probably will. I mean, it could take you 1 year to get through education, right? But I want to give you a place to start, and I suggest ADHD 2.0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a post in our Facebook group called My ADHD User's Manual. You are going to have until Monday, March 8th, to share your one-page ADHD user's manual. And I'm going to give you the weekend to work on it. And then I'm going to randomly choose a name from those who have posted their ADHD user's manual. And that person is going to receive a free coaching session with me. And you can work on anything, absolutely anything. We can process something. We can develop a plan. It doesn't matter. So tomorrow we have our Facebook Live Q&A. It's going to be at 1 p.m. PST. Submit your questions at spyhappy.me/QA2. Please try to make them about this training. I'm trying to give you some structure. Again, so impressed at how short and to the point your questions were. Very impressed. I'm going to have to work a little bit with my AOK women on that. Okay, so in training number 3 this Friday, what we are going to focus on is what do I do with my life? I'm going to talk about how to build confidence, how to build motivation, and the foundation that we need to build this foundation, right, for our interest-driven ADHD brains. So anyway, thank you so much for sticking with me. I went over, I can't even tell you. So 43 minutes. So I was supposed to do 90 minutes. So 1 hour and 43 minutes means I went over 10. Is that 13 minutes? You can see how bad I am, right? It's so bad with timing. So anyway, thank you so much. I'll see you in the Facebook group tomorrow. I'll be in there today as well. Start working on your ADHD users owner's manual. Okay, bye-bye.